Good morning, everyone. I am thrilled to be here this morning. I thank you for your attendance today in what is a really exciting anniversary for New Jersey. And I'm thrilled to introduce today's panel and let them share their information. As you heard at last panel, some of the information that they're going to share with us today is information that we're desperate to know about impairment recognition. And we're going to have some good conversation here because some of our panelists have definitely different views on some of these issues. So I'm excited to hear, see some sparks fly. And we're going to try to be careful because the mics down there are actually the ones with the differing viewpoints. So we might need Frugal here to, help mediate a little bit. So with that, I'll give brief introductions and I'll turn it over to the experts to talk about our topics today. So today we have with us Michael Hoffman. And Michael Hoffman is the founder of the Hoffman Centers. His specialties are government affairs, policy analysis, and legal advice, particularly in the area of cannabis. He also specializes in the area of expungement, which has become particularly critical under the adult use statute. He has his undergraduate degree in chemistry, and you will hear how that becomes significant when Mike Kelly presents his presentation later in the science in this area. He's got extensive expertise in municipal court matters, expungement. He's expanded his practice in the field of cannabis. He's frequent presenter. He's a member of the New Jersey State Bar Association Cannabis Law Committee. And most importantly, he's an adjunct for Rowan University. We have with us Sergeant Michael Kelly today. He's the president of the New Jersey Association of Drug Recognition Experts. He's been a New Jersey police officer for 20 years. He works currently in Jackson Township. He is a drug recognition expert. He provides training throughout the East Coast and has done so for almost a decade. He's a specially trained officer who determines through a series of roadside tests whether a driver is intoxicated due to drug use. He's been a recipient of the MAD Award for dedication in his field. He's married with 2 children, and he notes that they inspire him in his efforts in professionalism every day. Finally, we have Frugal Mouton, who's a lawyer who specializes his practice in cannabis law, litigation, and regulatory compliance. He has public and private sector experience, including serving as the General Counsel for the State Senate Majority Office and Assistant Counsel to Governor Corzine. He was pivotal in helping to draft the 2021 state law legalizing recreational use of cannabis in New Jersey. He served as an adjunct at Seton Hall University School of Law. It's okay, it's a competitor, but we still like them. He's a frequent presenter, including a recent podcast relating to New Jersey's cannabis laws for the National Cannabis Industry Voice podcast series, and he's top 100 on 2021 New Jersey's Cannabis Power List. So we're thrilled to have our panelists here today. And I note that this topic is of particular interest to Rowan. One of the attendees earlier asked a question about New Jersey law and federal law. And I think it's really important for us all to remember that Rowan, like all federally funded institutions, is in a very unique and difficult situation with respect to adult use legalization. Specifically, cannabis still remains a Schedule I substance under federal law. For federal law purposes, cannabis is the exact same thing as cocaine, crack, or heroin, which means it's specifically and explicitly prohibited on our campus. And so we've got a state in which adult use is legal and you can use it almost anywhere you want. But if you have it in your dorm room and if we don't take action, we are committing a federal offense and we can jeopardize our federal funding. And so understanding what's going to happen next in the federal sphere, understanding how drug recognition happens in the state of New Jersey, and understanding the impact in a federal place of business is particularly important. I was thrilled to hear Ruth note the impact of drug-free workplace acts because it's important to remember that while it's legal in the state of New Jersey, Rowan is an entity governed by the Drug-Free Workplace Act and the Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act, and they are clear in their prohibition of the use, sale, manufacture, or possession of marijuana or any Schedule I drug on our campus. So I gave my disclaimer. I hope you all enjoyed it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the experts in drug recognition, and we're going to start with Frugal.
Thank you. That was kind of scary a little bit. I was like, wow, I'm sitting in the principal's office. And shouldn't have done that. But she's right. And you have to be 21. And you're probably not going to be 21 until you're a senior. So that too. So right now I'm a partner at Fox Rothschild, one of the national law firms. They have a huge cannabis practice. So I make money on people trying to get licenses. And inevitably, when the money starts coming in and people start fighting with each other, it sucks for them, but then I make more money because they're fighting with each other. So that's what I'm doing now. I speak a lot on this topic, and people always ask, how did I get into the cannabis space? And the answer to that is I didn't decide to get involved in cannabis law. It was forced on me. I was the General Counsel for the Senate Majority Office. So I work for all the Senate Democrats, and I'm the head lawyer. So if there's a big bill that comes in, I'm the guy that has to help get it done. If there are judges that needs to be seated, I'm the guy that has to get that done. I'm the guy that has to make sure the laws are constitutional. So when now the story you're about to hear is 100% true, but some things may have to be changed to protect the innocent. Right? So Senator, let's call him Rick Slutari. So Rick Slutari just comes in my office one day, and he's also the chair of the Judiciary Committee, so we work together a lot on the stuff with the judges and stuff. So not uncommon, he sits in my office, we're talking, and he says, I think we should legalize marijuana in New Jersey. I'm like, bro, you see this stack of stuff I have to do right here? What are you talking about? This is a place you can't pump your own gas. You can't buy a beer at the 7-Eleven, like the only place in the world you can't buy a beer at the 7-Eleven, and you think these people are gonna vote for that level of freedom? Next question, right? So he's like, no, I think we can do it. And so we start having this conversation. And I'm like, well, what's the hook? What's going to get our senators and the governor to go along with this? He says, hundreds of millions of dollars. That's the first thing. So at the time, Colorado was flush with cash. I don't know now, but at the time, there were articles saying Colorado has hundreds of millions of dollars in tax money that they got from marijuana. They don't know what to do with it. And I was like, yeah, that may change some minds, right? And then the ACLU came out with a report that said you're 3.5 times more likely to be arrested if you're African American than if you're white for marijuana. It's like, okay. So now we have the group that cares about money that might be able to convince, and then we got a group that cares about justice who might be able to convince. It's like, oh, okay, we might be onto something. What's interesting about that report, I'll mention, is it is true. You're 3.5 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana if you're African American. But there's less than 3 times the amount of Caucasians than black people in the state. So the actual numbers are more white people get arrested for marijuana than black folks, like just raw numbers. So when you start playing around, you got to know that. So when you say, all right, we're going to do social equity and we're going to give licenses to people that got arrested, while market-wise, we're going to keep this 3.5 times number. We have to keep that in the public, right? You can't say mostly white people because that doesn't work. But you know that the result is going to be mostly white guys are going to get these licenses because most of the people that are arrested are white guys, right? But that's just kind of something that you don't push. Like there's a whole marketing thing with everything you do, and a lot of you guys are going to get out and get into business. Marketing is key. So we got the money, and we got this report. So, all right, we're ready. We're going to legalize, we're going to tax, we're going to regulate. Going to have our first meeting. I'm ready. I got my notes. I got my PowerPoint. I'm ready to have this meeting. So this is what we're going to do. We have a bill that's probably 50 pages at the time. Go in there. 2 minutes into the presentation, another senator, we'll call him Senator Pasta. How about Pasta? So Senator Pasta comes in. He goes, I'm not voting for this. This is going nowhere. Only rich white guys from out of state is going to come and take the money out and leave us with nothing. All New Jersey people are going to get is high. This is how, and then I'm like, oh wow, that went well. Senator Slutari, this is going great. Meeting over. So, we're taking notes. Me and a couple staffers, we're taking notes. Rich white men out of state, right? So the first thing, the rich, what are we going to do about that? So then you see conditional licenses. That idea came about, and those are for people that aren't multimillionaires, they'll have a way to get a paper that they can go out to investors and try to raise money. Okay, that works. Then the white men, so then the whole thing about the diversity, women, disabled vets. Gonna earmark a certain percent for that group to get past the white men only thing. Easy to do. New Jersey's 40% minority, so we're gonna hit that number without trying. We know that, right? Then the out-of-state thing. So then we create a whole section about micro licenses. And these licenses are smaller. You have to be 100% New Jersey owned, and you have to live near where you're going to operate. All right, Senator Pasta. Meeting 2, I'm ready for you. So we go back, we have another meeting. We explain this whole thing. He's kind of quiet, and people kind of quiet. All right, this is making sense, we're moving. And then another senator from up north, urban district, she says, well, a lot of my constituents live in public housing, and they live in apartment buildings, and landlords, number one, want the right to tell people they can't smoke in the apartment because you have people upstairs and downstairs, and it's going to be a whole thing, everyone's mad at each other. So we have to make it so that landlords with more than a couple apartments can keep people from smoking. But that creates a problem if you're in a district where a lot of people live in apartments. So, okay, how are we going to deal with that? So then the idea of consumption lounges arose, right? So that'll be places where people that live in federal housing, live with their parents, can go somewhere and partake. All right, so now we're ready. Gonna have another meeting. So we got this done. We're almost there, at least I think so. Then Senator Pasta again, he just didn't like it for valid reasons. Like he didn't want more people on the road that was just impaired. He didn't want young people to get their hands on the stuff. He didn't think that it was good for the community, period, to have more people impaired, period. So I think, he would have made alcohol illegal if he could have. Like, that was his perspective. But he's trying to sabotage it, obviously. So he comes in and he says, what about social equity? So I'm frozen. Like, what does that mean? So he says, well, you're going to have people in jail for doing the same thing that you have people come in and make millions of dollars and do. That's not right. So we got to make it somehow equitable. That's fair enough. So then we started with the expungements. If you got a conviction for marijuana, you could get an expungement. What about people that live in impact zones? That whole thing came up out of the social equity conversation. So there are places in the state that were more impacted by the war on drugs than others. Take that as a given, right? But what does that even mean? What is an impact zone? So now back to the lab again. This goes on for a year and a half, trying to satisfy 21 senators and 41 assemblymen. We knew the governor was going to be on board. So now we're trying to deal with this impact zone definition. How do you define it? First, marijuana arrests, right? So if you got a whole lot of marijuana arrests, then you're an impact zone. Well, the result of that sheet was the bigger cities got it because they had more people, they had more arrests, and then smaller towns. Well, that's not exactly right.
By the way, my friend, you are aware of my objections to this part of it.
No,
but I'll say it because you were part of the lab. When they were doing that, they based it on the UCR, which is the FBI statistics,
right,
which are by the police reporting agencies and not by the municipalities, and then define the term as the municipalities.
The story doesn't end there.
Okay.
The story doesn't end there.
I'm not sorry to interrupt your story.
No. It starts with that. That seemed to make sense. And then then obviously the list was weighted to the people that had the most people. So now we're going to do arrests for marijuana per capita. So then there's another sheet. And that sheet had all the wealthy towns on it. Because you're a lot more likely to get arrested for marijuana if you live in a wealthy town than if you live in an urban town with a lot of people. The cops don't have time for that. They're not going to arrest you for that, right? So now we have a list of the towns that we don't want help. So what are we going to do now? So then you add more stuff. We're going to add total crime. You get another list. Then we are going to throw in unemployment. Let's throw in poverty, right? Then you have another list. Okay, now I think at this point, that is an impact zone. You got marijuana arrests per capita. You have crime overall, right? You have unemployment, and you have income, right? We're happy with that. So now we have a list. Now politics comes in. Now remember what I said earlier about marketing and how you market the 3.5 times versus saying that more white guys get arrested. So the same thing happens with impact zones. You have some municipalities who do not want to be on the list because the mayor would get fired if people knew that objectively they're an impact zone. You have another group of municipalities that have to be on the list because their marketing is that we are been treated poorly, things are going terrible for us, right? So we need to be on the list because we want this extra money, we want this extra bump, right? So you have people that want to be on the list and you have people that don't want to be on it. I don't want to make it a racial thing, but I would say generally speaking, white towns do not want to be on the list, right? I'm getting calls like, I'm on this list. I'm like, you're on the list because you meet the criteria. And then you have the other towns that have to be because that's just part of their marketing strategy. So what do we do now? We add size. So if you automatically have more than a certain number of people, you're automatically an impact zone. Doesn't matter about all the other stuff. So if you look at a place like Jersey City, and all the money that you have in Jersey City, if you look at the average income of Jersey City, the unemployment and all that, they're nowhere near that. But the mayor, he wants to be on the list. So if you actually look at the legislation, the definition of impact zone, 10 pages long. Not exaggerating. If I'm exaggerating, it's 8 and change. Why? Because we had to manipulate a way to get the right names on the list. Now, I'm not arguing with you because of that fact, because it's not as objectively as it sounds, right? And then there are towns on the list I've never heard of, like Lumberton, Pemberton. I was like, how goes on?
Well, how does Manilokin get there?
You're not listening. You're not listening. Like
They're on the list.
because they want to be on the list. And if you don't want to be on the list,
And if numbers make the list, it shouldn't matter whether you want to be on the list or not want to be on the list. Numbers are numbers. That's why that's what I've had a problem with. That's what I've had a problem with.
I think that's right. But welcome to the reality of how the world actually works.
Sorry about that.
Right. So now you got the impact zone list. We're good with that. Now we're trying to figure out the expungements was the last piece. Who's going to get the expungement? So at first, if you got arrested for possession, automatic expungement. No one had an argument about that. That's fine. Then another senator comes in and hadn't said anything throughout this whole time. And she says, she's an attorney, and she says, it's the prosecutor's discretion to decide whether to charge you with distribution or with possession a lot of times. So you can actually have the same amount of marijuana, but the prosecutor decides it's in 2 bags instead of 1 bag, so we're going to charge you with distribution instead of possession. That changes everything. So she's like, it's not fair if we don't let distribution also get expunged. Okay, well, how much distribution? So then someone's like, well, we don't want someone that was selling 100 pounds a week to get an automatic expungement. Okay, so where's the line? So you look at the law, it's like 4th degree is distribution under 1 ounce. No arguing about that. 2nd level, 3rd degree, was distribution between 1 ounce and 5 pounds. And that was a problem. Because if you didn't include 3rd degree, I'm going to lose some votes. But if I do include 3rd degree, I'm going to lose some votes, right? Because the chasm was just so broad. And then people coming to me, how can we separate the people that only had less than a pound? I'm like, it's impossible. You get charged with 3rd degree, and no one knows. It's no calculation in there to figure that out. So you either got to take them up to 5 pounds or not. Crashed and burned. couldn't get it done. And that was the end of it until, put it on the ballot, it got voted in by the people, and then we're able to pass the legislation after that. So that's the story.
Well, I'm gonna add a little bit to
I need you to hang on for 2 seconds, okay?
Okay, all right.
I know you're dying to jump
dying.
in. I know. I'm sorry. So, first of all, I think Fruquan noted that I was a scary principal. I think a walk through history of legislation is even more terrifying for those who want to be part of the political process, right? Hearing the wheeling and dealing that happened to try to make multiple constituencies happy, and we find that it's impossible. We know that the legislation as enacted has a lot of what I would describe as flaws in areas where we could all respectfully disagree on things we would have done differently. And so one of the areas that I think that we can respectfully disagree is an area that I'm going to ask Michael Kelly to speak about, and really about how we go about drug recognition under the statute. And then we're going to let Michael Hoffman jump in before he becomes apoplectic on me.
Don't worry, I'll jump in on Mike Kelly too.
I'm going to try to let Mike Kelly get through his well-articulated presentation, explain to us what drug recognition is, because I know we have a lot of really interested audience members who want to hear more about how New Jersey does this calculus.
Do you want me to talk about DRE now?
I would love you to move into your material if you do not mind.
Sure. You want to start the PowerPoint? I'm the only one that did a PowerPoint. Sorry. Just wanted to break everything down a lot easier for everyone to understand. I've been teaching marijuana impairment for the past 5-6 years now, since Colorado became legal. I went out there, I observed what happened out there and all the different strains, what they're seeing, everything. But so what you could basically, now that we have legalized marijuana, every type of paraphernalia that you think about is now legal. So they have people on the street smoking meth and everything else, and cops are not approaching them because in the court of law, the court determined that a meth pipe is legal because you could smoke marijuana out of it. Yes. There's other things when I go through my PowerPoint for you guys to understand how the THC metabolizes in the body, how it goes into the brain, and so on. So I'm just going to do a brief overview of what the 3 tiers of the law are. Hopefully you can help me out with why it's created this way. The consequences of the law, and also the Farm Bill, if you guys are familiar with that, because all the new synthetics, because of the Farm Bill out there, it's breaking down to be like a hallucinogen now, or 30 times stronger than the normal THC that we are seeing. So when these kids or people take these synthetics, you are actually test animals, testing rats, because we don't know how they're acting, how you guys are going to act on it. We're going to talk about the various forms and also what a DRE is and what I do. Okay? So the first tier of the law is anyone over 21. Any of the students here over 21? So you could basically possess 6 ounces of marijuana. So if you break that down, yes, that's a lot. That's supposedly personal use. So to put that in perspective, that is 84 to 168 blunts. Can you smoke 164 blunts, sir?
I hope not.
Or for us old people,
It's like, is that a challenge?
504 joints. You could Google that, and that's what it comes down to. So that is almost a garbage bag. So I don't understand how that is considered personal use. You can smoke in designated areas. So if it is a smoking area, like you could smoke cigarettes, that's where you could smoke. And DWI laws do apply. So what happens is an officer pulls you over. There's certain signs and symptoms that you see to prove that you're impaired. They take you out, and you do those 3 psychophysical tests. The psychophysical tests prove impairment. It is not created for alcohol or any type of drug. It proves impairment that you can't operate that vehicle safely. From there, they bring you in the headquarters, and they call a drug recognition expert, which I am, and we do a series of tests, which I'll discuss later what I do. Then all those people who are 18 to 21, you cannot possess it at all. But there is a notification that you're supposed to get. There's a little written warning. You guys all live here at Rowan. You guys all don't live all throughout the state. So if you get a written warning here, You go home, you get another written warning there. There is no centralized system to find out who is getting the warnings and where. So I work in Jackson. If I give you a written warning for having possession or smoking marijuana in my town, you go to Seaside, that's still your first offense. You go to Wildwood, that's your first offense because there is no way to link anywhere that's going on.
That was a little of an oversight.
It gets better.
But it gets better and worse.
A juvenile, you could see up there. Same thing, can't possess, written warning. If I go to you, if you're smoking a marijuana joint, I could get charged for the 3rd-degree civil rights violation. That is marijuana, alcohol, shrooms.
That's the worst thing that he can do to you as a student is you can get a write-up. The worst thing that can happen to him is that he can he can get behind the wall for 5 years.
And a juvenile doesn't even have to give me the correct name. They could be a John Doe.
So guess what's happening?
So because of that, me and Mike, we've been talking about this for a while. So what's happening really, the consequences are police officers are not willing to lose their job to go up to someone who's smoking marijuana joint. So if I see someone and they put that joint away, they crush it, put it in their pocket, I can't search them. I can't do anything. If I pull a car over with a juvenile in the car and I smell marijuana, the only thing I could pursue further is a DWI. I can't search it. I can't ask for consent to search the vehicle. I can't do anything.
Mostly because they don't have the ability to consent.
Correct.
Under 21.
Under
anymore.
21. Over 21 is different. So if you're over 21, you're driving the car, I could ask consent. You could get more trouble than a juvenile. So the next slide, I talk about the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill was a consequence of, I think it was signed under Trump, to allow anything with 0.03 or lower of THC to be allowed to be purchased. So because of that, that was with the CBD, all the things that you find at your head shops, your gas stations, they were a dietary substance. But because of that, you're starting to see a lot of Delta 8s, Delta 10s, and we'll go through with some of the other slides, and it's expanding a lot more. When you take some of these products that you find at your gas station that say it's dietary substances and that they're safe, you bring them to a lab to test them, none of them are at that 0.03 level. All of them are above and higher than that. You don't know what you're taking. You're a lab rat when you're taking this stuff that people are saying are good substances, dietary substances, and they're supposed to be legal. So back in 1995, a lot of you guys probably were just born, the THC level was very low at that time. It was around 4.0. Because, as we know, we're federally regulated, right now they only do the test for simulations between 3 to 5% THC level. Even at those small, low THC levels, they're finding impairment in the simulations. But if you look how it is now in 2015, I know it's a little older slide, if you could switch. I'm sorry, I can't see that you're doing that. It's about 12.5, but the highest, if you go to next slide, they're finding cannabis is as high as the grass is at 3.34%. So that is just grass. When you smoke marijuana, you have your connoisseurs who are grass people, and you also have your connoisseurs who are for your oils and your dabs. So if you look at your BHO, your shatter and your butter, that's about 85, that's in the bottom left, sorry, 85 to 95% pure THC. They smoke that different than your grass. I have a 9-year-old. And when I was putting this slide together, when she saw the Doritos, she says, "Daddy, what are those?" Those are come in 4 in a bag. And when you have your edibles, those are all edibles there, you're supposed to take one chip and you wait 40 to 90 minutes. But you know how people are. They don't wait. They take the whole bag. So now you're starting to get paranoia. People starting to go crazy with this stuff. The Skittles are only a certain amount you're supposed to take, but there are people going to the hospital when they start taking the whole bag. So it's very interesting how these edibles are. The next slide are some of the synthetics that you see. Your Delta 10, that's another new one that's out there you're seeing because of the consequences with, the marijuana being legalized and also with the Farm Bill. Your HHC, that's another synthetic. The HHO, that's more of a hallucinogen, the oxygen that goes into it. And then the THCP, that is 30 times stronger than regular Delta 9. So,
Mike, can I jump in here? Sure. As a chemist, I always love to point this out. These are all different analogs of the chemicals that can be derived from the plant. And I'm sure a lot of us out there had a really nice poppy seed bagel. That same poppy is a beautiful flower. That same poppy is also heroin. That same poppy is also fentanyl. It's how it's prepared. It's how it's chemically induced. We need this argument. While I appreciate Mike for bringing it up, and while it is unregulated under the current system, it is a modification and frankly a bastardization of what the intention was, and that is to make the plant, the consumption of cannabis, legal. This is not consumption of cannabis. This is a chemical and a drug impairment and a drug inducement.
Yeah, because when you break down the molecular structure of these synthetics, it is the same thing as THC delta 9, but you just put a little prong on it.
You move the carbon to a different location.
Or you add an oxygen to it. Now, the next slide is even higher than everything, THCA. That is about 99% pure THC. The only way to get it to work, you need combustion. So people are smoking that pure, and that, again, is another consequence, different analog you're talking about of the THC. So we're talking about some impairment factors. Cool. Okay. So this is something that we look for when with a police officer, when I pull the car over. These are some basic impairment factors, which I do see. So we all know it relaxes you, disoriented, they alter your time of perception, your lack of concentration. The thing what marijuana does, it attaches to those receptors in the brain, which affects your memory. So you only could store a certain amount of memory at a time. So that's why we try to give those multiple tests, those divided attentions, because a person's brain could only hold 30 seconds worth of stuff in that short time span. So the marijuana blocks that, and we could determine certain things. In those high levels, I know it says it aggressive, might not see that. I have seen with dabs and higher levels, people becoming very aggressive towards us. They forget that we pulled them over, and they actually start fighting with us. And they said when they get sober, oh, I took a dab, or I took something else, because they're not, when they go from the grass to the dabs, their body is not used to that high, strong THC in their system. They do have short attention span. The divided attention test, we do see something with that. One of the main things that we see when they're driving is speeding, swerving. That does happen. Their eyes are bloodshot. Their eye tremors. So if you close your eyes, their eye tremors. You see that. Body tremors, slow movement. So these are all different things that we do see that I put as part of my evaluation.
Now, Mike, do you see these in every one of them, or just most?
These are the common ones.
Common ones. So
Yes.
some of these are in some people.
Yes, the common ones. So the next one, if you picture when you're driving your car and you see, someone's walking down the street and you're smoking that marijuana cigarette, you have to first perceive what you're seeing in front of you. Because you're smoking that marijuana, that perception of it is going to be starting to get impaired. Then when you're processing that in the brain, and then you have to react in that physical movement to step on that brake, you're going to be hitting that person or something that's in their way of when you're driving the vehicle. So that's why divided attention, your eyes are impaired. That's what marijuana, THC, does to you. Next slide. Let's see, the other one didn't show up. That's fine. So this is a really good slide to talk about how cannabis works in the body. So when you smoke your marijuana joint, every time you smoke, the marijuana THC peaks into your body. So it goes very high. Once you stop, it starts going low into the blood. And then you keep smoking, it gets higher. So by the time you stop smoking, it gets out of the body, out of the blood, right to the brain. So if you look at the slide, within an hour, all that THC is getting out of your blood, going right to the brain. However, your impairment is still staying steady, and you can't perform on those psychophysical tests.
But I would argue, Mike, that there is some some experts that have said and testified in part of the State versus Olenowski question recently that there's no direct chemical test that says that there is a certain amount in the body that correlates to impairment.
I'm glad you brought that up. This really helps with that because there is no urine test, no test that can prove impairment. Because when you smoke the marijuana, it goes to the most fatty substance of the body, which is the brain. So the only way to get a tox sample of how a person's impaired is if you get that blood sample at that time of the motor vehicle stop or when the person's impaired at the job. When you're getting the urine out of them, that's the coup, that's the non-psychoactive portion of the blood, of the drug, which is occurring within that hour or two after they're smoking.
But even some of the experts said that direct blood tests wouldn't give you a direct.
Correct, because it's going so quick to the brain. So that's why you need to do psychophysicals or some type of cognitive test to determine if they're impaired. Their blood pressure, their pulse, the pupils. So you are seeing, one test we do is when we shine the flashlight in the eyes, your pupils actually pulsate, which is something that people don't notice. Yeah. When you do 2 circles in front of the face and go right to the nose, they can't cross their eyes. Their eyes actually go out this way, or they button hood out, all around. So it's a very interesting. So. It's interesting. Yes. There's one slide that didn't show up here because I had a little thing on here I just want to talk about, and Mike could do this because I'm almost done with my presentation. There are 2 different types of marijuana, and there's your indica and your sativa. Both different types have different ways of how you want to be impaired. Now that marijuana is being legal in New Jersey, when you go into these shops, they're going to have jars like they had in Connecticut. Not Connecticut, I'm sorry, Colorado.
Actually, they can't do that because
They're not gonna do that here?
No, you can't have jars because it has to be prepackaged.
Well, it's going to be prepackaged.
Before it gets to the actual retail dispensary.
Well, the prepackaged is going to be indica, sativa, what type of it's going to be.
Or hybrid.
Or hybrid, what it's going to be for, the amount of drug it's for. Indica is for inside the body high, sativa is head high.
Before you hand it over to Mike, yeah? Beautiful.
And talking about wire, I know there was questions about wire. Right now, there is nothing for us. We are not allowed to do it. The AG won't allow us. The PTC won't allow us. It's most likely going to be more of a civilian type of situation.
Now, does the PTC have anything to do with DRE or with the testing that you've gotten on this aspect?
The PCC?
Yeah, the PTC. Do they have anything to do with your
So,
training?
Mike, can I? So,
It's
real
not- it's
quickly.
IACP.
Yeah. So we're doing initials, right? And so our audience doesn't necessarily understand the initials. So I'm going to hand this. I'm going to hand this to you in 2 seconds. Okay. So, real quickly on the issue of impairment and the inability to have accurate testing methodologies. So, one of the issues that we see here, and one of the reasons that we're most concerned about the federal and state differences, is that typically universities are one of the leading entities in figuring out ways in which we can move forward research, right? And so how do we make advances in COVID, for instance? It was through partnerships with universities and figuring out accurate testing methodologies. Unfortunately, universities' hands are tied right now because the only research universities can conduct is either research on hemp under the farm-based bill or research from cannabis that's provided from Ole Miss University, which has a monopoly on providing cannabis for research purposes. So that means all these wonderful dispensaries, the farmers are going to be growing product in the state of New Jersey. Universities are prohibited from touching that substance and figuring out what its potency is. So the stuff in those bags, if you had it on campus and we were trying to figure out what the potency is, we're not allowed to do it. So one of the main reasons that we're focused on federal legislation and trying to get legalization is so that we can be a partner in testing and figuring out what our kids are ingesting and whether or not it's dangerous. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike Kelly. I'm sorry, Mike Hoffman.
This microphone's working, so I'll leave you that in front of that. But as an interesting side note to that one laboratory or that one farm in Mississippi at Ole Miss that's the only cannabis farm in the United States. That cannabis was recently tested genetically against what's on the street, and it was found to be completely distinguishable. It is not what's on the street. It is not what we are selling in our dispensaries and in our labs. It is what has been grown on this lab for the last, or this farm for the last 50 years, inbred in Mississippi, like most things. Now, no, that's me being me, because I spent my time in the South. I am really glad to have a chance to speak here, and I'm really proud to speak on this campus because it's about 20 minutes from my house, so it means that I don't have to go very far. But I am a lawyer, but I want to take you back and talk about a little bit about where I come from. And 50 years ago, before I was born, my mother was a student here when this was Glassboro State Teachers College. And she consumed quite a bit of cannabis, according to her reports. And when she got married to a Marine or a Army captain who came back from Vietnam, who became a juvenile prosecutor, she chose to have kids. She chose not to consume anymore, and hasn't for the last 50 years, which tells me that she wasn't an addict, she just really enjoyed it. But she also provided me with a lot of wisdom on that aspect of it. When I went to undergrad at Tulane University in New Orleans in 1995, as a lot of people were talking about, 1995 seems to be a pretty banner year. But when I went there, the drinking age was 18. And I was allowed to drink on Bourbon Street in New Orleans when I was 18. And I came back from my freshman year with lots of drinking stories. And I told my sisters, my little sisters, and I told my mom all about these times I was out in Bourbon Street drinking and dancing and doing all the crazy stuff. And she said, "All right, enough. I'm sending you, your sisters, to bartending school." Now, my sisters were 15 and 13 at the time, and I was 18. And my mom's friends turned to her and said, "Ruthie, you're nuts. You are insane. What are you sending kids to bartending school? If you're going to be consuming a drug, if you're going to be taking a drug, if your friends are going to be taking a drug, you're going to know how to pour a proper shot, you're going to know what you're consuming, you're going to know how much you're consuming, and you're going to know what somebody looks like when they've had too much and when to not serve them anymore." And it was that kind of thought process that made me, when I became a lawyer, look into DWI law. And it was in that DWI law that I said, how can I determine when my client's on the side of the road if he's had too much? Better yet, how do I know before I get into my car if I've had too much, if I've consumed this substance? How do I know if my kid, who knows that they shouldn't have it, has been consuming this substance? Those kind of conversations led me into the cannabis space because I didn't come out of college or law school or the first 15 years of my practice intending to be a cannabis lawyer. But that's what ended up happening. Now, I loved hearing Fruquan talk about the formation of the bill. I want to give you guys a concept of scope. I want to give you guys a look at the scope of the industry. We're looking at last year's revenues in the cannabis industry were $30 billion. Now, I'm saying that, and you're like, okay, 30 billion, yeah. Do you know what the revenues for the NFL were last year? 12 billion. It's 2.5 times bigger than the National Football League. The projected New Jersey revenues are supposed to be around 5 to 6 billion. Do you know what that's equivalent to? The entire revenues of the entire National Hockey League. Now that helps me explain the scope to a lot of my white friends to understand exactly what's going on there. Now, this next statistic that I'm going to give you is going to blow your mind because I always thought that Fruquan had a tough pull to pull different constituencies together. But if you look at the general question, when people were asked, should cannabis be legalized? More people in the United States agree with that than believe that we landed on the moon. It wasn't a hard push to get us to cannabis legalization. It was a hard push to get us as to how. So so let me see if I can move into the meat of what I'm going to say. And there are three meat points that I'm going to talk about, and that's the licensing priority, which Frugal was talking about, and I think he nailed most of that. The funding that goes to the impact zones and to expungements. What I can tell you about is that there are certain counterpoints that need to be mentioned. That Frugal was right. That those third and fourth degree offenses that were included in the expungement statute were absolutely important. But at the same time, they left in that first and second degree offenses for cannabis are never expungible, ever. So the same thing that person is doing at the dispensary down the street, that person who's walking up to the dispensary to buy it and has that on their record can never get that cleared off their record. And that can affect whether or not where they can go, what they can do. Things like, I don't know, as Kim mentioned, or as was mentioned earlier, as it affects public housing, guess what dormitories are? They're federally subsidized housing, so they are federal housing. You can't consume in federal housing because they're under federal law. But in terms of licensing priority, one of the things that was focused on was the social equity. And as Frugal said, what is social equity? It's so fuzzy. It's so unknown. What they defined it as was two different things. The first was that you had to have at least one petty disorderly or disorderly persons offense, two petty disorderly convictions, or one indictable conviction to be considered. And I always said, well, that requires at least 2 to 3 touches with law enforcement, because we have diversionary programs and had diversionary programs for 20 years. That first one would count as a dismissal and never run onto your record. So therefore, you had to have at least 2 to 3 touches with the criminal justice system for you to be considered a social equity applicant. But not only that, but you had to be convicted, not arrested, just convicted. That means that you had to be dumb enough to get arrested and get caught, and dumb enough to be convicted. Are these the people we really want to push toward the front of the line? There are people out there who've been doing this business for years and not getting caught. Those people would argue that they should be the ones who should be pushed to the front of the line. But the other half was very important to me, and that was economically disadvantaged areas. The CRC set those, and that they said that where there's economic disadvantage, where you've lived in an economically disadvantaged area, those should be included. Now, that definition was different from the definition we talked about with impact zones. And the conditional licenses, absolutely. I think that those were a great thing, because the access to capital is difficult. One of the things, access to money in this industry is almost near impossible, because you have no federal banking protections for a bank to give you money. So where else do you have to go to get money? You have to go to private sources that are going to be predatory. That's what they do. They're going to give you money to get money. That's the way the world works. As Frugal told me in politics, in the real world, money gets you money, and money better get you a lot more money in ROI, and which is another acronym, Kim, for return on investment. So they're going to want that. They're going to want that aspect of it. So there's been a lot of predatory things with regard to that. We had to find ways to find financial aspects to protect those people. The conditional offers that ability because it gives that person something that they have a value. They have a conditional license, and if you give me money, we can actually open. So that was a beneficial thing. It's a good thing, and it's definitely something that's working with it. Impact zones. I'm going to take my 20 seconds and get on my soapbox about impact zones. There are 4. There should be 5. By the definitions that Frugal created and the 8 pages that he had, there are 5 that should be that have been created because of the way that the law was written. The 5th one of the 5 is Lakewood, and they didn't even get included in the second iteration where the CRC made an investigation and determination of what the impact zones were, and came up with 88 different cities that should be there. Now, why is it different between 4 and 88? Well, 70% of the money from the tax revenue is to go to impact zones. If you figure that you're going to have, let's say, I don't know, all that boatloads of cash that Frugal was talking about, you're going to get $100 million in that pot. If you're splitting it among 4 cities, and you're splitting it among 88 cities, that's a much smaller number. It can actually create change, or it cannot create change. And that's me getting off of my soapbox, because the biggest problem is you can't determine. They use the term what was going on in the I apologize. I didn't write too many notes about this. But when it comes to the crime statistics, they based them on the federal reports, which only talked about the police reporting agencies and not the municipalities themselves. Police reporting agencies, in my county, I live 20 minutes from here in Cumberland County. There are 6. Do you know how many municipalities there are? 24. How do you split those numbers up? They didn't think of that. They didn't include that in the 8 pages. They just said, whatever the police reporting agency or whatever the UCR says, that's what we're going to do. Well, they didn't split it up as to how that happened. So the CRC came up with a way to do it. They haven't disclosed exactly how, but 88 different cities got included. One of the things that Frugal didn't mention also about impact zones is that there's definitely a portion of the cities that should not have been included, and they were ones that were along the Atlantic seaboard. that was anyone that has any county that borders the ocean should not have gotten an impact zone unless they had a specific number of people in their community. And frankly, the only ones that did were and again, this is me being the nuts numbers nerd. They based it on the 2010 census when it said the most recent census. This bill was passed in 2021. The 2020 census existed. And into that 2020 census, Lakewood's included. But Lakewood was the only major city in the state of New Jersey that voted against that 67%. They were the only ones that voted against. So we don't include them. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the thing that means something to me, and it means something personally to me, and I'll pull my water jug out again to tell a story. This was my birthday present from my wife and kids this year. Now, why would I have a mug with a bunch of marijuana leaves on it? From a 10 and 12-year-old kid. They get it. Each one of these represents somebody that I've helped expunge their record. Each one represents somebody whose record has been cleared. Now, why do I still have a job? Why should I have to do that kind of thing where we went out there and did these automatic expungements and wanted to automatically do them? Well, Frugal left one word in. You left a word in that ticked me off, and it was solely for marijuana-related offenses. If the conviction for solely marijuana-related offenses. The AOC focused on that and announced amazingly that they had automatically expunged 380,000 and that they had dismissed 88,000. And 2 years before that, at one of those meetings that Frugal went to, they testified that between 1990 and 2018, there were 1 million simple possession arrests in the state of New Jersey. So my first question when I heard those great numbers that were touted by the AOC was, hey, where's the other 500,000? Well, I'm starting to find them, and I'm starting to fight them. And while the first 500,000 got dealt with by the courts, the other 500,000 are going to be on this mug. That's my job.
It's going to be a big mug, Mike. Can we move on to some Q&A now?
I'd love to.
Beautiful. So we have about 15-ish minutes to talk some Q&A from the audience. I would love to take any audience questions that you might have, and if the audience doesn't have specific questions for our panelists, we have some lined up for them. But I'd give the audience the first crack at it.
I'm actually curious. This is a little bit off topic, but not quite so much. Thank you, Tina. One of the things that have been raised is about should police officers be allowed to, use recreational cannabis when they're not on duty. And this has created a conflict because you sign a federal agreement that basically you will comply with Schedule I federal drug laws when you take your firearm. So you have some New Jersey mayors saying, I'm fine with it. You have other New Jersey mayors saying, no, I'm not. And I'm curious to get some of the thoughts and opinions of our...
As long as it's federally regulated, no. That's just my opinion, because it says specifically when you sign up for a firearm, it says right on there. So you're violating anything you do with carrying that firearm.
But Mike, are any should then therefore no police officers be allowed to use medical cannabis, be subscribed or
Medical's different than recreational.
Is it under?
Because
Mike, I'm gonna respectfully disagree.
Medical, when you take a medical any type of medicine you take, you don't get to that level of being impaired, because you've taken it to a level to deal with a medical level. I'm sorry. When you take any type of medical situation, any type of medical, like Xanax medically, marijuana medically, anything you're medically prescribed, you don't get to that pharmaceutical level to show signs of impairment. When you take it recreationally, you're doing it for a recreational purpose to feel a certain way. Just like when you drink beer. You have to think marijuana and alcohol as the same way. I don't drink alcohol medically because I know I have a couple beers, it's going to get me buzzed. If I'm going to smoke marijuana, I want to feel buzzed. But if it's medically, it's there prescribed for a medical reason to help you medically for a medical purpose.
I gotta jump in on that one.
Oh, okay.
It's the same drug. So I represent a lot of companies that do both. So they sell the medical and then they sell recreational, and a lot of the conversations really is about what to put on the package. It's not like the drug is different. It's the exact same thing.
Drug.
It's like, are we going to put it something that says a child could use it with a prescription?
I'm
and
talking
then the whole
about
debate is
impairment.
about that.
But if you're taking it medically, you're not going to see impairment.
If you take it, you
Then
still
what's the-
could. If you
I can tell you-
have a bottle of
But I
pills,
can
if
tell
you
you
take
from the
too many,
evaluations I take,
you're going
I
to be
do.
impaired.
I can tell you from the evaluations I do on a person, because when we do DRE evaluations, we have medical, that we look for medical reasons, non-impairment, or someone who's showing signs of impairment. If they're on a medical marijuana and they're prescribed it 3 times a day and they take it as prescribed, their body it's called tolerance. They have a tolerance that they're able to take it that much marijuana that they're not going to show signs of impairment.
Yeah, I was almost convinced with that. I was skeptical about the DRE thing before, and then the way I was finished up in my head is like,
Well,
I don't care
you
about
could be
that so
skeptical,
much. Like,
but
'cause
I
I'm
have
like,
a 9-year-old daughter
Yeah.
who could tell the difference between someone who's impaired or not, and I taught her what I do, and she could see just by going down the road, that person's impaired, that person's impaired, that person's not.
See, I'm on the fence
9-year-old.
with that. I don't know, because at one time I had a coworker had an infant, right? So she had went on maternity leave and had a baby, and everybody knew that. So she comes back to work, and then one day I run into her in the hallway. Eyes are red. She's kind of like walking a little crazy. You know what I mean? And I had the thought, because I'm dealing with the marijuana thing, is like, I would like to find the guy who can tell the difference between that and marijuana. Like somebody just hasn't slept in a few days versus
Okay.
that. Now, he says he can.
He can.
Personally, I don't really care, because if you are a driver on the road, what does it matter? The guy can either drive straight or he's swerving or whatever. I don't care if it's because you haven't slept. I don't care if it's because you're talking on the phone. I don't care because if it's weed, alcohol. You remember some years ago, Tiger Woods got arrested for being impaired, and there was a video, and then it was like count to 10, and he couldn't do that, and it was like touch your nose, and he like touched it. He was like, no, your nose, and it was like the funniest thing. And I thought he was on alcohol, and it's like, no, it was a prescription drug, right?
Yeah, it was benzo.
That had him messed up. So I dig it, like you want to have this specialty, but at the end of the day, just let the guy walk the straight line and count to 10, and to me, I don't care. And the same thing with the employment. So during the process of getting the legislation passed, we have a lot of meetings. And I know there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking about what was in the bill, but when it comes to legislation, it's a home run or a strikeout. So you do what you have to do to get it done. So we're having a lot of conversations with employers, and they're like, we don't want our employees to come to work high. So my question is, why? Right? So I don't want them sleeping on the job. I don't want them coming to work late. I don't want them to be lazy. And I said, fire them for that. You don't need a test. If the guy's coming in late every day and falling asleep, fire him. You don't need a test to decide whether he's not sleeping or playing video games late at night and whatever. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I just want to add one thing, and to answer Kim's question, I want to tell the joke for the 4 people who are going to get in the room. Mike, you ignorant slut. When it comes to cannabis, there is no medical under federal law. It is Schedule 1, which means that it has no acceptable medical use. It is not permitted under the federal law, period, end of sentence. That's the way that the federal law looks at it. That gun permit question is not a gray question, it is a black and white question. And when it comes to Schedule 1 is Schedule 1. Until they move cannabis off of Schedule 1, it is still a drug with no medical benefit.
It's in hydro. Wait. Wait. If you want to go to that,
Thank you, Kim, for the powder keg question.
No, it's Schedule 2.
Okay,
Mike?
but still saying that it's illegal.
Mike Kelly, use your mic,
can go
okay?
back.
Awesome.
Hi. So I actually have a question for Sergeant Kelly. And in listening to the panel this morning, when we were talking about terminology, we were really focusing on cannabis. And throughout your presentation, and I completely follow exactly why, you are still using the word marijuana, which makes sense because of the position that you hold. So are there conversations in law enforcement and potentially other industries even about looking more closely at the language that we're using and how we are communicating about cannabis so that we have this controversial topic and it's ongoing? The perspectives are diverse and wide. Are there steps being taken so that we're even using the same language and being able to have open conversations that feel productive and fruitful?
Cannabis is the legal word. Marijuana is illegal. If you go by that, with how it is with the law.
If you want to talk
So-
specifically about it,
Yes.
under the statute, once you have over that 6 ounces or 1 ounce for purposes of distribution,
marijuana.
you have marijuana. Under 1 ounce, it is cannabis. Technically, that's the way the law was written. I can't.
The law uses.
That's the way it was
The
written.
legal law says cannabis. The illegal portion is marijuana. Is that how you got?
Yeah, and that was
And it's the
intentionally
same
done
thing.
that way. Right. It's the same drug, but it was intentionally done so that we could separate what is legal versus what is illegal. So we changed cannabis to marijuana, and it says both in different parts
Yes.
of the statute.
And I appreciate the explanation, and I completely follow it. Intellectually, I follow it. However, the discrepancy with the language then creates more controversy or more misinformation or confusion for the residents of New Jersey and beyond when it comes to like how we're talking about it if we're looking to have productive conversations. So I just thought it was an interesting kind of distinction because your content from your presentation stood out in comparison to the other people that were here today. And that was just something I wanted to hear more about. So thank you, panel.
So that is an excellent question, and I would say to you, and I would say to our folks involved in the public policy realm, right, that that's a great area where, an interested researcher could be truly critical in showing how our language directly impacts the way in which we have these conversations, and that would be permitted research because it's not touching the plant. So that'd be a great area for somebody like Nawal and Kim to follow up about and think about. Well, should we be using the word marijuana or cannabis, and how does that influence our opinion about what we do with it? It's a great point. Thank you so much. And thank you for distracting the battle up here. I appreciate that. Demand.
If I could ask a question about various workplace environments. So when we talk about various workplace environments, various social environments, a preschool teacher is different than other settings. Let's say a school bus driver. There are a variety of different contexts in which cannabis use, legal or illegal, can take place. Can you please comment on the various social and cultural settings where these laws can apply, specifically schools, nursery schools, and other places of employment?
Well, wasn't this Senator Pasta's big problem?
That was a big sticking point because we were trying to figure out, like, could you have a blanket prohibition for certain people, right? So at the end of the day, it was about, for a lot of people, freedom or oppression, right? Whether you're going to give people the freedom to conduct themselves one way or not. So then the conversation came, are we going to, oppress certain groups of people? The cops came up, right? People that hire, that do heavy machinery, that came out. I don't remember any conversation about teachers, being excluded. But I remember the cops and I remember the heavy machinery, and we couldn't figure it out. Like, it went back and forth. We couldn't figure out what to do because whatever you decide, you were going to get arguments from both sides. So I think that's they kind of ended on letting each mayor and chief of police figure it out amongst themselves, and then you'll have some towns where cops can get high in their private lives and other places where they can't.
And as a shout out to the first panel, I'm sure and as a shout out to that first panel, I'm sure it's going to be a nightmare in the future collective bargaining discussions that they're going to be having, as public entities, as to when testing is going to be allowed, what testing is going to be allowed, and how it's going to be allowed.
Right, and it may just be as simple as you're the chief of police of Jersey City, you have a meeting with your top guys, and you say, what do you guys want to do? And if they do a poll and most people say we want to do it, then you got to say yes, so they leave and go to Newark. I don't think it's any more complicated than that. Now, if a cop is underperforming, like I said before, you're going to get rid of them. In any job, you're going to get rid of them. But if you're in charge, would you rather say, don't get high, no alcohol, yeah, you would. But on some level, everyone should have a level of freedom that everyone has or doesn't. Yes.
What's the deal with growing? When are you able to grow your own marijuana in New Jersey?
Not allowed.
Happens?
Not allowed.
All right.
Home grow. He was asking about home grow.
Yeah.
If individuals will be allowed to grow their own product.
Asking for his uncle.
Now,
Your uncle should not start growing because that will be illegal.
Now, let me give you some context into that as well. The possession of the seeds right now is currently not illegal because they have less than 0.3% THC and would be eligible for legal possession under the Farm Bill. If you were to grow hemp and it were to go hot, you'd have to get rid of it. But you'd have to get a permit from the State Department of Agriculture to grow that hemp. There is also, and I have argued this, and I would argue it to Jeff and Executive Director Brown. I argued it directly to the Cannabis Regulatory Commission itself. There is place in the legislation for home grow as it exists currently. There doesn't need to be new legislation. They could offer a micro sub license for medical grows to patients. They would have to teach you, test you, and do it safely, but I think it could be done as long as the regulations were written correctly.
All right, here, real quick. Here's the inside baseball, right? So we go to Colorado, a group of senators, group of staffers, we go to Colorado, we sit down, we talk to regulators that had already done it, start asking questions. One of the senators says, if there's one thing you would do differently, what was the big mistake that you would change? And the guy said home grow. And he said, why is that? Because what we want to do is we want to regulate, legalize, and tax. If the person is growing it in his backyard, you can do none of that. You can't tax it. You don't know what's in it. He might grow 12 plants instead of 6. He's selling the other 6. People have stuff you don't know where it came from. Now you got to go to his house, knock his door down, and count plants. No. And that's what happened.
Great insight. Next question. And this is our last question, by the way.
My name's Rocco, by the way. Hello. I have a 3-page paper due on this question that's kind of related to the topic, so I thought I'm here anyway, might as well ask it. Do you think the legalization of cannabis will level the playing field for racial and ethnic minorities?
In what way?
That's a question, so.
In and of itself, no.
No, I mean, at the end of the day, to get a marijuana license, and I counsel clients all the time, it's like the hardest thing to do. If you want to start a business, and it's the first business, it's probably not a good idea. Because not only do you need money like you do in any other business, not only do you need expertise like you do in any other business, but you can't go to the bank, right? You have all these extra rules. You got to pay me $100,000 to get the license in the first place. You know, if you don't have enough money and you don't have any experience, let's start with a trucking business first. Let's do a laundromat. You know, I don't know that there's a racial outcome disparity, but I don't know if the reasoning is that. It is the money, the experience, the connections to the local community to get the okay from them, and you can be any color. And it's going to be the same way regardless.
Where I'll offer you the other side to look at especially for your paper, is to look at the opportunities that the legalization of the plant has offered to people who are no longer worried about the effects of that conviction on their record. The wealth that they can then obtain by getting a better job that they wouldn't have been eligible for because of the previous convictions that they had on their record. And they were 3.5% or 3.5 times more likely to have been arrested for it. But one of these statistics that meant more to me from that report was that they were 6 times more likely to have been incarcerated for it. So these were effects on the entire families and generations of families. This war had a mess. It made a mess, and we're working to clean it up. That mess is racist, and we need to work to clean that up.
So great final question and great final comments. I'd like to thank our panelists today for taking part in this and for being such good sports. Thank you so much.